Is this not lead singer of a band syndrome? I mean, he thinks he can recreate this anywhere, and he's being insufferable in reminding the rest of the band about this before he eventually falls back in line. And look, he's done this a couple of times, too, and doesn't the lead singer of the band, doesn't the headliner of the band do this a lot? Oh, I can do this without you guys. I don't need you. But then they come back always because they are maybe a little bit uncomfortable with what's next. Now, supposedly, Russ isn't uncomfortable with what's next. But with the constant reminders of, like, hey, what would you be without me? I mean, that is lead singer of the band complex. Okay, John Fogerty, calm down, you know?
Fogerty's a good one. See, I was going to go with a couple different ones. First of all, I was like, all I'm seeing is the next version of Chinese Democracy, which was the Guns N' Roses album after it was just Axl became Guns N' Roses. And it took like 20 years to produce, right?
Right.
Like, is that what's going to happen? That we're going to Russell is going to become Axl Rose Guns N' Roses? I don't know. My favorite example of lead singer tension is Journey. If anybody's ever seen Behind the Music, I love Behind the Music. Behind the Music is one of my absolute favorite. Like, there's a complete plot for every single one of them that it follows. Like, a bunch of friends get together. They get famous. They can't believe how lucky they are. Some guys get into drugs. Other guys go on ego trips. They have problems. And then at the end, every time they're back together. They're not as big as they once were, but they're just playing music and having fun again. The Journey one is phenomenal because they ask them what happened. What happened when they started to pull apart? And all of the members, all of the other members of Journey, other than the lead singer, Steve Perry, are like, you had one guy that was putting himself in front of the band. You had one guy that thought it was all about him. You had one guy. And then they go to Steve Perry, and he's like, I don't know, man. It just seemed like we drifted apart. You're like, that's exactly why that happened. And maybe that is like everybody. What happened? Well, you had one guy that thought he was ahead of everybody else. You had one guy that thought the offensive line stunk. You had one guy, and man, I just think that we stopped being as successful together.
And I don't know how you change this mentality. That's, I think, the biggest problem right now outside of winning. And are you going to win more than you won this past year? I mean, that's I think, the big obstacle in their way. Like, regardless of coach, definitely not regardless of quarterback, you need to have Russ there if you're going to do anything this coming season. I don't know how it's different, and I also just don't know how you really change his mind. Like, what if you do all the things that he tells you to do? What if you get this good offensive lineman, and you're better on the offensive line this coming season, and you still end up losing in the first or second round?
That is my answer to everyone who is saying, and there were plenty of people texting in last of saying, hey, you pick the quarterback over the coach every time. It's like, what happens when the next coach does something that displeases the quarterback? What happens if the odds of you hiring a better coach than a guy who's had a winning record in 9 consecutive seasons, who's made the playoffs in 9 of 11 years as a head coach, the odds of that happening are minuscule. The odds, and maybe you will. Maybe you would be able to do that and thread that. And Pete is all of these things that, hey, he's antiquated, that they're winning in spite of him, not because of them. I don't believe any of it. What happens then? Does that guy get thrown overboard too? We've had 2 offensive coordinators that have been torn through over the past 3 years as well.
You're running out of people to throw overboard. I mean, you are running down to, all right, are you going to stick with John Lennon or Paul McCartney here? You know, and I don't know who you want to pick as who's who as far as the Seahawks. We're going to make that comparison, but I mean, that's sort of what it's come down to.
That one's morbid because one of those guys dies, Paul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of them's you're named after, though.
I am. I was named after Paul McCartney. Fun fact, everybody.